Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me, Rachel and Lead with Tempo. This is my first time on a stage talking to actual human beings in a room since 2019, so please bear with me if I'm a little rusty. But it's so nice that it's in such a literally cozy space, like everything is carpeted. It's like a warm hug being in here. So, without further ado, 11 days ago, I made a choice. I said goodbye to my job as a UX director at Shopify. I did announce this on LinkedIn just so any of people who really wanted to come and hear me talk about Shopify for 20 minutes would not be disappointed. I'd been there for 7 years. It's the longest I've stayed in any one job, in any one position. And in that time, I held lots of different titles. I moved from UX lead initially to a senior manager to a director eventually. And I worked with about 5 different teams or large departments in the company. Sometimes these were jobs I chose. UX lead, funnily enough, was not. It was something that was kind of, do you want to do this? And I said, sure, why not? Sometimes they were jobs that kind of grew up around me because of the sort of miasma of organizational change or just various things changing. But across those years, I managed really big teams. I took on lots of leadership responsibility, and I really liked a lot of the problems that we were solving and the range of problems I got to solve in a company that tackles something as big as commerce, which is huge, bigger than anything I had tackled before. And I liked almost all of the people I worked with. It was a great group of people and a great place. And I think that was part of the reason that when I got to a point where I felt like I don't know what's next, it wasn't because I wasn't surrounded by smart people and thinking about exciting problems. It was really like, what is it? Where do I want to go next? What's in it for me? Oh, there he goes. Sorry. He wasn't dancing. But then sort of one Sunday afternoon in February, I was working and I was sitting on my couch. This is my couch in my house in the countryside in Nova Scotia, which is beside the Lahave River, which is where I grew up. And it's very nice. And I was able to move here to this sort of very out of the way place that I grew up in because of this job. But in February, my home actually kind of looks more like this. This is my garden. I was hibernating, basically. I was hibernating, I was isolated, I was in the snow. This is like context setting for the story. And there were some things going on in the news at the time. I don't know if you remember, February, there were some things going on between Canada and another country and some things to do with commerce that you might have heard about in the news. And I remember looking out the window at the snowy Lahave River and realized that some part of my brain had just already made the choice to leave. I always knew that I would have to decide this to leave eventually. Nobody is going to be in Shopify until they're 65, most likely. But I hadn't known how I would make that choice. What would be the thing that would make me decide it? And also, this is 2025, the choice had felt kind of impossible to make in the previous few years. It wasn't impossible, I kind of can see that now, but it really felt that way. Coming through the pandemic, the company that I had started working at in 2018 had transformed until it was almost unrecognizable. And coming out the other side of that, everything really looked different. The whole tech landscape looked different. But at times it also felt kind of like, what else is there to go to? What other companies would feel different in this moment? But on that day, sort of deep in the central processing of my mind, there was like a tiny little door had clicked shut without me even trying to close it. And all I had to do was act on it. And that was a very freeing feeling. So once you make a choice, things can start to move pretty quickly. And of course, I had already started to think about what I wanted to say to you when I got to this stage today. I had been thinking about it for a few months. And I wanted to be honest with you. I didn't want to stand up here and sort of do a talk that was like, 10 weird tricks to go from being a writer to a UX director. And I didn't want to pretend that now, once I have left, that I have everything figured out, that there's no sort of risk or guesswork or stakes involved, because there are stakes. But I also didn't want to kind of pretend that my wayfinding to the career that I had, to this UX director role, was just all down to luck and happenstance and being given the right opportunity at the right time. That was definitely part of it, but there was also a lot of effort involved. So how did I get to the point of making this decision? And then thinking about it further back, how did I choose the path of my career in the first place? How much choice was there in it? And then I started thinking, do the twists and turns of a working life, like Rachel said, ever really feel up to choice? And how much choice is there when you say yes to an opportunity when opportunities feel really thin on the ground like they do today? And how much choice do you feel when you're searching for an employer to just say yes to you? And in between, when you're in an organization, how much choice do you feel when you're working your way up, when you're looking for people to give you opportunities and to give you advancement, and you're always looking for something from someone else? Even that word opportunity has this air of being granted. It's about the right fit. It's about finding sort of like the right place. There's a sort of, opportunistic means just sort of like landing in the right spot. But it does also have this idea that you have to be received. There has to be someone there to grant it. And beyond any company and the opportunities that exist in companies in our industry right now, in our specific small, cozy discipline of content design in the world right now, I just wonder how much choice is there to make the life or the career that we want, to work in ways that feel productive, not just in a capitalist sense, but in the sense of being full of agency, pushing things forward in the right way, in a positive way that we believe in, choosing things that change things. So maybe this isn't universal, but I know I have long felt like I'm waiting for something to give, something to change, like a little egg to crack open. And I hope that I have choices and that we have choices, so that's what I wanted to talk about today. So, why did I choose to start working in tech in the first place? It's not where I started out. So it was basically out of competitiveness, jealousy, contrariness, all of the wonderful traits that this young person had in abundance. It was maybe 20 years ago, and at the time I was working in a newspaper in Dublin, Ireland, and I was writing an article every few weeks, but mostly my job was like explaining how to use the content management system to the other people who worked in the newsroom. And my partner at the time was a software developer, and he had trained on the job and he was really good at it, and his career was rising fast. And I was like, I could do that. I didn't actually want to be a software developer, but I had this seed of an idea. I had a feeling about where I wanted to go. And all I knew was that I wanted to see how the web worked from the inside. This was pre-iPhone, pre-apps, pre-SaaS companies, and there was still a lot of mystery to the web. And this is actually shockingly close to the first dot-com crash, although to me at 24, this felt like ancient history that had happened to people much, much longer ago and not just 4 years previous. So here I was in my almost mid-20s, and I wanted to take the mystery out of the web and understand how things were made. And the self-promotional way for me to tell you this story would be to say that I was so much curiosity and I was so driven and I wanted to learn. And that is kind of true, but what did I want to learn about? So from the beginning, my design career has been a series of responses to questions, or more like a kind of casino game with a deck of cards that I don't hold, but I just keep playing the hands that I'm dealt. I keep saying yes to things. The more unexpected the offer, the more likely I am to accept. So I applied for a job as a writer at a UX agency, and I was actually asked to be a UX analyst. I still don't really know what that means. As a content designer with a very small team of one, I was asked what title I wanted, and I said, lead, I guess. And then I applied for a job as a content designer at Shopify, and I was asked to be a UX lead. So everything I did was a series of responses to questions other people were asking, to prompts. But who was the person who was saying yes to all of this? What was that motivating factor that pushed me into it in the first place? So as a little girl, I was interested in a few things. I was interested in books. We didn't have a TV. My parents were hippies. But underneath that, I realized now that I was actually interested in industries and in how things worked. At 10 or 11 years old, I would buy Architectural Digest. This is actually a copy that I had in my room. I remember it so vividly because I studied every page. But I would read the antique ads at the back of the magazine, and I would think, like, who is buying these French armoires? And who are these people? And what's going on? How does this commerce thing happen? And how do these things ebb and flow? And while I really loved movies and storytelling, I was also interested in the movie industry and the people who made things happen behind the scenes, the power brokers that paid for things, but also the creative people that came together for a month or 6 months and created something that wasn't there before. So by the time that girl became 24 and 2004 rolled around, I was working ostensibly as a writer. I was being published, but I was also reading all these websites online about the state of media, usually in New York, which seemed to be where all the writing from the web seemed to be happening, and all these new voices seemed to be coming out. And funnily enough, at the same time, compared to now, everybody was also saying that all newspapers and media companies were for sure going out of business and there would be no writers or news anymore. But it just didn't feel that way to me. I felt a lot of hope. So here was the web that was bringing information that I cared about to me, and it was all written in this way that felt new and exciting and young and kind of casual. And I wanted to figure out, how did this happen? How did they make this? Who are these people? I wanted to get involved. And I also wanted to make more than the $18,000 a year I was making at the time. So I wrote this letter to this agency, and I applied, and I got the job. And I didn't really know what I was applying for, but I had drive, confidence, curiosity, and youth, basically, and the ability to push myself into something that I didn't understand yet. I also quickly found that there were things from the world that I already knew, the world of content and how content was made and print journalism, that still made sense in the world of UX. There were patterns and rhythms to the way a project should run. There was a benefit to understanding the creative process that helped stories get pitched and researched and written according to a house style, and then edited and laid out and sent out the door. And there was a humility to knowing that you'd have to do the same thing the next week. The humility to start from zero over and over again is something that really informed me. And I think it gave me the confidence to keep sharing things with the world and asking for more input into the design process. I think it was the observation of the world of print, the processes and structure, and the fact that this print method had existed for decades, if not centuries before in other newspapers, that gave me this confidence to push for my work to be more firmly part of the process of UX in the first place. But back then, this is now around 2007, just to keep you up to date in our timeline, people were talking about how the web should work and how it should be open and democratic and sort of handmade, and it should be person to person. And we were building something from scratch that felt genuinely new, but it was still grounded in the creative process that we already understood. It was still grounded in humanity. So, where are we now? We are in 2025. The future keeps happening. These moments of instability, these moments where hope maybe doesn't feel as possible as it used to, are just constantly coming. And it's kind of exhausting, and I think maybe we should all take a tiny break. That's how I feel. But from our current vantage point, there is this inevitability to the progress of tech. I actually read somebody say on social media this week that using AI in our work, for example, which I will get into, of course, is not up for debate. And I was struck by that phrase. Not up for debate, no debate. But there has always seemed like an inevitability to the progress of tech. You know, the websites that became networks, the phones that became, shopping malls and places where we just live our lives, and now AI. So it does feel like there's an inevitability to the progress of tech now, but at one point there were many paths at these other moments, and we chose one. And I think we chose these paths because we choose to frame problems in certain language, and that leads us to prioritize certain things. I think that's how choice happens. I think it's a story that we tell ourselves as we go along. So how did I make the choice that I've just made, and why now? Well, in order to tell you that, I just want to talk about design principles for a second. So when I started at Shopify in 2018, there were lots of places on Slack and in our offices to talk about design and how it was made, to talk about principles, and we talked about them a lot. It was actually a place that was really open to debate and discussion and contradiction, more than companies I'd been at previously. And designers that were on my team that were successful usually were successful because they had their own way of seeing things and their own point of view. And when they broke down a problem in a design review or in any kind of review, they started with their own perspective of what was necessary, and then they would work their way back to our design system from there. And they usually then would forge new principles from that process. But a few months ago, this post was shared. Maybe you've seen it. It's from our Shopify CEO. This wasn't the instigation of my choice. I hadn't previously made it, but it's kind of part of the story. And the reason for that is how this communication came about. So the message is that reflexive AI usage is now a baseline expectation at Shopify. And I think my problem with that phrase is the word reflexive, or maybe it's the baseline expectation. It's the idea that it's a mandate. It's the idea that this is something that is coming for sure, and you need to speed up and get on board, and there's no time for discussion. It wasn't clear to me what I was supposed to be telling people to speed up for. I had a team of about 21 people, give or take, and often they were asking me, how should I be using AI in my work? And I didn't feel equipped to tell them. For one thing, using AI in design workflows can often make things slower. At least so far it does. Like, you can generate UI copy, but it might not be better, and it might take longer because you're both describing how to write something and then editing the written thing. You can use it to crunch data and do taxonomy stuff. I think that's really exciting and interesting. So you can do it faster or generate new things. You can generate images for sure, but as recently as May of this year, it just wasn't great at generating UI components or even speculative UI patterns that could help you see different ways of communicating something in our product and moving someone through a flow. And that is the bread and butter of a product designer's job. So what I advised most of my team to do was to use it. We were required to, after all. Use all these tools that were available, but use them as play, use them as exploration. I I wanted people to sort of use them as sparingly as their conscience demanded if they had an issue with the environmental impact of AI. But I wanted them to not use them out of stress of some kind of like imaginary AI efficiency goal or quota that they should be reaching. You've got to start with a design problem and then figure out if this tool is actually going to help you get there, maybe in a more interesting way, not necessarily in a faster way. As a leader, I've always tried to lead in a way that let designers discover their own perspectives. As time went on, I knew a lot about our company's design principles from all of our early discussion and just the fact that I was in the design system team for a long time. I knew why things existed, why we had patterns in a certain way, what had instigated them, and also sometimes how solid I thought they were, so which ones might give way if you pushed against them a little bit. So if I advised someone on my team to stick with a convention or a principle, I tried to explain why, that maybe it wasn't the right time to break out of it, but not that I didn't think it was the right pattern. I didn't like to use the word sort of right or wrong. I had some responses and feedback especially from product and engineering people that told me I was successful at doing this, that they appreciated that I always explained not just what I believe was the right course, but why I believed it. I wanted to always combine strong opinion with open rationale. The designers, again, that did the best in a company like Shopify, notice I don't say the best designers, they did this naturally with the most fluidity. They looked only for the sort of necessary consistency with the rules rather than starting with the rules. They used the rules to suit their needs rather than being fearful of them. And I was a bit fearful that this was starting to change. I think we today are building new design bars with AI as our material. And my fear is that we're not doing it openly. We're doing it dogmatically. It's really tough to break out of dogmas once they're set, and especially for the people who didn't set them themselves and don't understand why they were set that way. A dogma can become what a principle becomes when a company thinks that's what can unify its design sensibility. Do it this way and don't question it. Lots of companies, not just the ones that I've worked for, tend to talk about design success in terms of a bar, this sort of Damocles that hangs over your head and nobody really knows where it is, or they use sort of executive opinion to kind of guide people down a certain channel. When dogmas become something that we learn by rote or are fearful of, and they're not something that we discover through design discovery, then we're not doing the work of design, and we're removing choice from our equation and from our lives. So we are all writers, I believe. Most of us here are writers. And I think being a writer helps you develop a lot of skills that can help with discovery, because you need to tell yourself your own story about what things are and what they represent. And that can help you tell a story about the future, about what might happen down this path or that path. The framing of the story becomes what you design. I talk about this in my book. In 2023, I wrote it during the midst of the pandemic and deep in the winter. Again, lots of Canadian winter in the story. It's just a fact of life. And the book is really about the way that words and language drive design. And one of the things I talk about it in my favorite chapter to write was the chapter on metaphor and technology. So one of the earliest examples of metaphor in tech is that it's made of paper. It's documents, files, and folders. And the person who came up with that metaphor has since said that they felt it was a mistake, that it was limiting, that it stopped us from thinking about different ways that the web could work that weren't about just information retrieval. I don't think it's surprising that that metaphor stuck. We're people, we're very basic. When we imagine technology, we're always imagining something we can already do. We just want to do it sort of faster and with shinier things. So I think that's why the internet was first a set of documents that were stored in places, that were little paper files and folders that used to be all over everyone's desk. If you see a picture of someone's desk in those architectural digests in 1992, always covered with paper. That's what we understood, and we wanted to take that, make what was on the screen feel like the real world. And that translated into not just the terminology we used, but the form factors, the design language, all of those things. And then we had social media, and then we had to describe that, and it was all about connection and emotion. But we sort of left out the fact that the connection and emotion might be negative connection and angry emotions. So it ended up being sort of vitriolic gossip in some cases and vindictive in a lot of cases. There are nice stories about social media too. Like I read a story this week about a dog named Max who walked 5 miles in the middle of the night to get a breakfast burrito, and I would not have that story in my head without social media. But the impulse on social media has always been, hey, what's happening over there, and why aren't those people like me? So the curious thing about AI is that it doesn't have one metaphor. It doesn't have one single unifying idea or story. It's quite unstable right now. Like, is it a Star Trek computer? Is it an art director? Is it a creative writer? Is it a secretary, or is it a sci-fi killing machine, or all of the above? It's like we've poured all of the movies that we've made from the 1950s to the 2000s into a soup, and we can't decide on the flavor or the ingredients. Maybe that's because, like all of the AI hype people say, it will be so pervasive that it will be all about everything. But I think if it's all about everything, that's just an inability to choose a clear story. Whatever metaphor we use, that's what we end up creating. And it's usually something simple. Like I said, it's a file, I can pick that up. Or it's that feeling of being able to talk to people, but it's on my, it was on a telephone and now it's on my computer. Or it's a camera, but now it's in my phone. The thing about AI is that it is time-consuming to use. People use AI, people who use chat agents actually talk to them for many, many more hours than they spend on social media. It's addictive. But it's also time-consuming because you're telling something else to do something for you. You are not in the center of the story. Recently, I used an AI tool to put together an MVP for a website. I actually took these beautiful illustrations, which are by a human person called Emma Fitzgerald, and a brand design that was also done by a human person. And I said, oh, I wonder how it can do at generating something simple from these human materials. It took me about 6 hours, and it was, it did a pretty good job, but it didn't feel real. It didn't feel like something that was ready to launch, that I could rely on. Let me digress for a second, quickly, about what I think AI is for, especially as a writer. So a lot of us, I think, are writers, and I sometimes feel like the process of writing and what it does in the brain is something that you have to kind of like sidle up to, like sitting beside like a nervous animal that you don't want to spook. And if you try to drag it too close to you too quickly, you get sort of barking and word salad just comes out. But if you can be patient, it'll come towards you and can get these brief bursts of focus. So you probably know how it feels to have your brain detached from your typing fingers. I know I've done it. You've been typing and typing, and then you've just written some gobbledygook. You can still generate something that sounds kind of real. So funnily enough, I identify with AI in a way. I know what AI word salad is because I can do it too. And there's an example in AI that a lot of people call on when they're talking about AI writing specifically. You've probably all heard, in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, we talk about Marvin the paranoid android, the character that's very acerbic, and people are like, oh, that's like, every over-it writer that's just done with technology, and all the elevators that are really happy all the time, that's ChatGPT. It is kind of crazy how close it matches up. But if you are the proud owner of the omnibus edition of The Hitchhiker's Guide, there's also something hidden in the introduction that I found really interesting. I was reading it a few months ago, and in it, Douglas Adams, the writer, reflects on the inspiration for Hitchhiker's Guide while he was filling in the details of the first plot. And he said the Earth was demolished to make way for a new hyperspace bypass, and there's an alien who has to rescue the hero from Earth, and they go on an adventure. And he gave this character for the name Ford Prefect. And this was a joke that made no sense to me as a Canadian child in the 1980s, but I still love the book. And the reason that he chose this name is that when he picked up the old European travel guides that were kind of the inspiration for this story, he realized like a lot of times what was in them didn't make sense and wasn't true and wasn't real. And he said, I remembered when I used to hitchhike through Europe and would often find that information or advice that came my way was out of date or misleading in some way, and just came from stories of other people's travel experiences and not the authors. It's a collection of content, mostly incorrect, compiled of other people's stories. Sounds awfully familiar. Billions upon billions of dollars just to create a Fodor's travel guide from 1984. There's another writer quote from Arthur C. Clarke, which is often cited by tech people, particularly around AI. And it says that at a certain level of advancement, technology is indistinguishable from magic. But Clarke's third law, as this is called, even though it has a number in front of it, is not a scientific law. And I really want to draw attention to this. It is a writer's law that gives constraints to a fantasy world. It's a deliberate constraint, a writing prompt, a principle, if you will. And it presents as truth something without explanation or rationale, as something creative to respond to. It's an insight, for sure, because this can be true, but it's also a dogma if it's not questioned. And when you think about this quote as well, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Indistinguishable to who? And who is doing the distinguishing? So who are we in that quote? Are we Oz behind the curtain, or are we Dorothy pulling the curtain aside? Writing is not magic. It's a process. It's a machine for revealing our thinking to us and for helping us see its patterns. It is not thinking itself either. There's a line between what we say and what our brains think. And we have created a technology, a second technology, that is as good at lying as we are. We can lie in our own writing, and AI can lie for us. We have to get better at recognizing that these lies can happen in both places, or we risk fooling ourselves into mistaking output for input or masking for meaning. But we can choose to do things differently. We can have different metaphors and ideas. We can recognize that metaphors are just ideas, and ideas can change. So I think there are a lot of choices still to make about AI and about technology at large and about our careers. There's a lot of questions about where it's going and what it's for and what it will turn into. We have to figure some of this out to make it work for us. We have to do some investigating to do that. We can't just be passive. So I thought maybe I need to put the technology aside for a second and break things down in a journalistic way to understand the story we're telling ourselves about AI. Why did people start using the web in the past, back when I was trying to get into this career in 2004? Why was that so urgent to me? And why would I use an agent today? Is it the same motivation? Do I have that same feeling of discovery and hope? And if not, why not? I want to ask what an AI agent actually is. What are AI tools? Who is behind them? Who is acting on them? Can they be trusted? I want to ask how people behave in response to AI in the same way that how people behaved in response to the web, how people behaved in response to social media. How do they feel about the technology, and does it feel personal to them? Do they feel a part of it? And I want to ask, where is the source of this information coming from? What will happen to whom and by whom, where and why? These are the answers that I need in order to make my next step. And I believe that we will all find them eventually. For a long time, like I said, I've been making choices by answering prompts. So I want to see what happens when I am the one posing the question. Not just how did I get here, but where do I want to go? Any career or accomplishment or title, though it comes from your own efforts and your own abilities, is also a framing that you accept for success. It's something that's framed by someone else. You're living in a structure designed and built by someone else, and letting your real life fill someone else's chosen metaphors. And those frames and metaphors can change subtly and imperceptibly around you without you noticing it. The reason design spoke to me in the first place is that it is an attempt to apply reason and framing to problems and shape how they can be solved. I have been very, very lucky in my working life. I started at a time when a writer could create in a new landscape, and I wanted to be in that landscape, and I chose to be there. I wanted to know what technology was made of and how people made things with it together and what made those things connect with people. And I've always kind of vibed with how human disorganization and mess is always part of the equation of getting things made, whether it's a movie, whether it's selling a French armoire, whether it is technology. We have told ourselves a very clean and clinical story about technology, and particularly about AI and where it's going. But it's just a story. Technology is actually pretty organic, it's messy, and it's confusing. So are words, so are people. So I'm out here ready to make some messes again. Thank you.